How much do we know about our past? Do we have the ability to follow the traces of our history, accepting the direction in which they lead us? Discovering one's past means asking oneself these and other questions. Those who came before us, those most important personalities who have also remained in today's culture, wondered about the mysteries that enveloped them and left important questions for the generations that came after them. Where do we come from? Are we alone in the universe? History is like a poem with its rhymes, and its unsolved puzzles remain vivid and waiting to be deciphered. The same strange things happen. The same tough questions remain. We are unable to explain many things about our present, but we are easily satisfied with belittling important events from our past with simplistic explanations. We have had a strange idea and conception about UFO cases and sightings throughout the ages. For example, we tend to limit these incidents to specific places that are now part of the collective imagination. UFOs, flying saucers, aliens. They all seem to have the United States of America as their favorite destination. By now, mass popular culture has imprinted in our minds huge spaceships in the midst of the skyscrapers of an American metropolis, or flying over the White House. But what if instead we discover that the history of sightings starts from far more distant places and from remote times and cultures? In places that we would never expect to have been the backdrop of sightings and close encounters of the third kind. Il bel paese, the beautiful country, the homeland of good food, art and great politics of the past. Italy has a great history linked to extraterrestrials and everything that is inexplicable in events that go beyond our own planet. Events that can be found in ancient writings. Secret cases hidden by dictators. And even episodes of mass sightings in sporting situations. Here, in this beautiful country, in the Italy of the past and present, there are strange cases that have made the world discuss, and which are still considered guidelines for understanding these mysteries. The journey to discover life beyond our planet begins in this magical land, full of great personalities, enormous beauty, and endless mysteries and magical places. Ancient Rome. The sky is said to be God's instrument for his manifestations on earth. The men of the past have always observed it carefully, trying to interpret every single sign coming from it. For them, what came from the skies was a message, something that could guide them in their great deeds. For this reason, in many historical writings, events of sightings in the sky are reported, especially in situations of large works, such as the tales of journeys of war. By studying the descriptions of these cases of manifestations with a modern perspective, it is possible to find different meanings and to note similarities with many elements of past and present ufology. Among the writings that report these events is the majestic Bibliotheca Historica by Diodorus Siculus, a tome that narrates one of the most important stories of the genre. It is 343 BC. The Greek military fleet, led by Timoleon, is sailing the open sea in the middle of the night in order to reach the coasts of Sicily. Timoleon is heading there following a request for help from the city of Syracuse, which needs action to restore order and peace on the entire island. Timoleon's is a vital mission that could liberate a people. The wind is in his favor, but the darkness is impenetrable. Traveling at night is one of the toughest voyages for war fleets. Suddenly, the general sees the sky above his head open up, and a huge amount of fire pours out. From this conglomerate of flames emerges a sort of torch, a long object with flames at one end. In front of the incredulous expressions of the Greek soldiers, the torch, or the rocket, if we want to carefully note the description given, flies along the trajectory that the ships would take, illuminating the route until it disappears exactly on the coasts of Sicily, precisely those coasts that the fleet was trying to reach. A peace mission, an event that changed the fortunes of a country that was guided by a foreign paranormal body. Sicily, Italy, was the location of this vision. The Roman Empire is among the largest and most impressive civilizations to have ever inhabited planet Earth. Its power and domination extended over most of the world. What remains of their culture we also owe to the importance they gave to writing, to study, and to the strength that drove them to transcribe, reconstruct, and report historical facts. The Roman Empire strongly believed that history was an integral part of their lives, something to be reported and studied to leave a meaningful message for posterity, to pass down their greatness, their dominance. Titus Livius was one of the fundamental and influential historians of this civilization. He was compared to the majestic philosophers and historians of ancient Greece. Quintilian, in one of his writings, praised Titus, stating, "Herodotus should not be indignant if Titus Livius is compared to him." Much of the history of ancient Rome has come down to us thanks to Titus, but much has been lost and can only be reconstructed thanks to the historians who came after him. In his great work Ab Urbe Condita Libri, or the 142 books from the founding of the city of Rome, as well as narrating the whole history of the city from the time of its founding, he also reports many anomalous and extraordinary incidents. Titus writes in his historical tome a number of portentous phenomena, dating back to the winter of 214 BC, including Navium Speciem di Cielo ad Fulcisse, or a fleet of ships shining in the sky. Ships. It is curious that the historian uses this term to describe the unidentified flying objects that were sighted in that era. Could this be the beginning of an awareness? Plutarch is another figure whose writings historians and ufologists still study today. In fact, he reports another very important event that took place during a battle in 74 BC. The armies of Lucullus are about to engage in a ruthless fight against the army of Mithridates, when all of a sudden the sky starts burning in many places, and a huge flame-like body is seen falling between the two armies. Its shape is similar to that of a pithos, with a color very similar to that of molten silver. The pithos are the wine jars used by the ancient Greeks. Plutarch describes the shape of that unidentified object as that of a wine jar. A flying object that emerges from fire with a cylindrical shape. De Prodigis. Unfortunately, many of the writings of Plutarch and Titus were lost, meaning we have lost many details, and most likely numerous stories of this kind have not reached us. Fortunately, however, for the ancient Romans, history was a fundamental element of their lives, and the figures of historians had a certain type of prominence. It is precisely in the 4th century that one of the fundamental characters for the study of paranormal phenomena is identified. The one who is still defined today as the first ufologist in history. We know very little about Julius Obsequens. His life is still shrouded in mystery. All that remains of him are the very particular writings on paranormal events that he managed to reconstruct, starting from the texts of his predecessors. Thus was born the De Prodigis, the Book of Prodigies, dating back to the 4th century AD. In it, one can find many anomalous cases that occurred in Rome and in the settlements of the Roman Empire. This book is considered the first true ufological Bible, a text that is still being studied by leading ufologists all over the world in order to connect the dots and shed light on the various cases of close encounters of the third kind. Things of his present and past that no one could explain. Prodigies, in fact. Most of these episodes were naturally interpreted as emanations of a divine will that manifested itself on Earth to shock and create doubts about the unpredictability of human life in the peoples of the time. One of the first cases reported in the De Prodigis is dated around 100 BC under the consulate of Gaius Marius. We are in Tarquinia, the original home of the Etruscans, another mysterious civilization that populated Italy for centuries and lit the first fires of what we now consider Italian culture. After a long day comes a calm sunset. In the sky, a round object with a spherical shape is sighted. Something that is described as a flying shield that crosses the sky from west to east and then disappears into thin air. From this description, it can be assumed that it is recognized as a large metal object that flies with a precise linear route. Something that only a sentient life form could control, internally, but also externally. In 91 BC, Livius Droso promulgates the laws of war in Aenaria, a now submerged city near Ischia. Julius Obsequens reports a case that occurs at the dawn of a new day. A frightening sound that seems to come from the sky is followed by a huge ball of fire that appears in the north, and then disappears by burning out along its journey. Another flying object. He also reports that in ancient Spoleto, a similar globe of fire, rotating on itself, lands, remains embedded in the earth for a while, constantly increasing its size until it rises into the sky, obscuring the sun with its brilliance, and then volatilizes into nothing. This time, a very strange case. The globe is seen to land and increase in size and then leave again for outer space. The historian of De Prodigis also tells us that a few decades later, in approximately 42 BC, a very similar event occurs near Rome. In fact, it would seem that a kind of weapon, something that today we would define as a missile, but which for the eyes of the time could have looked like an enormous spear, detaches itself from the earth with a great noise, and then shoots into the sky and flies away. Something that comes from the earth and rises to the sky. Something suggests that these foreign bodies come from the earth to rise to heaven, but they don't necessarily belong to this planet. It could be that these aircraft have already been on the earth for a long time, and that their time to go back home where they came from had come. The De Prodigis is full of these and many other anomalous and inexplicable manifestations. There are tales of blood raining from the sky, deformed animals with two heads, and other sightings of unidentified flying objects. Read with today's eyes, something seems clearer, sharper in our imagination. But what mattered at the time was the meaning of those apparitions, more than the objective facts that occurred in particular. Many of these mysteries that obsequens reported and reconstructed come from the writings of Titus Livius, of which, unfortunately, not much remains, due to the wear and tear of time. Perhaps, if we had the possibility of recovering and reconstructing those writings, the events and the meanings that these great minds gave to them would be clearer to us, and they would also help us to learn more about the history of our times. The New Epoch. In the transition to the New Epoch, two more cases of extraneous events can be observed to understand that the similarities between all these stories cannot be casual nor ignored. About 150 years before the coming of Christ, it is a peaceful and sunny day. On the Via Campana, the road that connects Rome with Capua. Herma, brother of the then Pope Pius I, is walking, enjoying the bright sun, when he sees a cloud of dust rising from the ground. A beast, as he describes it, lands on the ground, like a piece of pottery, about 100 feet in size. The upper part of the beast is covered with rainbow colors and shoots fiery beams, while a virgin dressed in white accompanies it. Of all of the cases reported so far, this is the most unique. Yes, we once again have similar elements. Fire, the shape and constitution of the so-called beast, its upper part which has rainbow colors, and flames shooting into the sky. The whole thing then landed in a cloud of smoke and earth. But the virgin dressed in white who accompanies it? Could someone or something of human-like size and traits have escaped from the flying object upon landing, and manifested itself next to it. The scales of white and grey are recurring colours in extraterrestrial sightings, as well as the rainbow colours that follow the flying object. The last strange case involving the Roman Empire is reported by Dio Cassius, another Greek-speaking historian, who tells of a fine silver rain falling from a clear sky above the Forum of Augustus. The historian remains to observe it and collect samples of this strange silver that rained from the sky, and then plates some bronze coins to preserve the material. The next day, when Cassius checks his coins once again, he notices that the silver plating has completely disappeared. Could it have completely evaporated due to its prolonged permanence in the Earth's atmosphere? These events, these mysteries, are like trying to grab hold of smoke. However much one might try to keep studying them, they vanish into thin air without leaving any trace. Clipiology. All these historians, these personalities who reported or reconstructed the facts of their own or of past eras, it seems they did not have the real conception of the extraterrestrial as we conceive it today. The real study that refers to species that come from other planets was born in Italy in the early 1960s, with the creation of a new branch of ufology, known as clipiology. The clipius was the hollow shield used by the legionaries of ancient Rome. Those flying shields described by Latin historians, according to whom these same shapes appeared in conjunction with anomalous flames in the sky. The need that founds the studies of these cases is to better analyze all those historical artifacts that could represent alleged evidence of UFO sightings. This branch of ufology began to spread in Italy, but was not very successful in foreign countries, so much so that it was replaced with paleoufology. The clipiologists, however, continue with their research and their studies, trying to make people understand how, in reality, these events of the past do not have many differences from those of the present. Sightings, close encounters, almost always have the same modalities, the same dynamics. More often than not, what has been ascertained thanks to clipiology or paleoufology is precisely that the intervention of these extraterrestrial beings causes something subtle in human reactions. There is always a blurred line between belief and superstition regarding these events, and man, especially in past eras, has always tried to make sense of these incredible manifestations. The attempt by historians to accurately describe paranormal events is often viewed with a critical eye and questioned by the most disparate professionals. The description of a scene, in an attempt to portray it as it happened, sometimes falls victim to over-interpretations and denials over the years. For this reason, ufology studies these and many other past cases. The Renaissance. It was around the year 1400 that the need to change, to discover and experiment with a new way of living, thinking and conceiving civilization was born in Italy. This qualitative leap in the study of life gives birth to the greatest historical period of all time, the Renaissance. In this period, the the greatest personalities of the country and of Italian culture were born and proliferated. Leonardo da Vinci, Lorenzo de' Medici, Machiavelli. These are just some of the artists, philosophers, and politicians who stand out in the vast catalogue of characters from the Italian Renaissance. This push towards a new life produced an era of great cultural, artistic, and political riches that are still recognized all over the world today. It is precisely on this era that many studies of clipiology have focused. Just like in the era of ancient Rome, there are many stories of UFO sightings still shrouded in mystery and mysticism. It's a normal day in 1487, in Forlì. The historian and painter Leone Cobelli is reaping wheat in one of his fields. He looks up and is dumbfounded. A huge bloody sword is flying in the sky. Cobelli recounts everything to the citizens of the city, who initially react with great skepticism, until a few days later, when, from the city walls, first fiery beams flying in the sky can be seen, and then a strange circular object described as a chariot wheel flying erratically, followed by a twinkling, like stars. This sighting creates great confusion, especially among the farmers of the small city of Forlì. It is curious to note how the descriptions of these unidentified flying objects almost always refer to war objects, such as shields, swords, spears, all adorned with flames or blood. All elements which, if observed with the eyes of the men of the time, are transformed into biblical and religious symbols, as if they were images taken from the Book of Revelation. In the same year of Cobelli's sighting, Giacomo Trotti from Milan writes of a similar event that occurred above the castle of Cassino, a small hamlet in Lombardy. A very large ball of fire appeared in the sky. It came over the castle from the direction of the park, to even pass over the tower where our meeting took place. And from there on, it disappeared. Finally, there is a last apparition, which has been reconstructed thanks to two writings by two different historians, who date it back to exactly the same night in 1496, apparently shortly before the death of Beatrice d'Este. They speak of huge fires that pass above Milan that can be seen as far away as Parma. A torch, flames with 6 green stars surrounding them, and hideous humanoid faces. As it passes, this torch can be heard bellowing, and from under it, insects emerge to then destroy the cultivated fields. Perhaps the most terrible vision that we have been able to recount so far. A third historian speaks of this event, but attributing it, perhaps erroneously, to the following year in the Brescia area, which is also in northern Italy. This time, he talks about a sickle instead of a torch, but always surrounded by green stars, and a human face, and its passage brings the arrival of worms and famine. But the real great UFO mystery of the Renaissance is not found in written documents, but in a work of art, still preserved in one of the most historic buildings in the city of Florence. A painting of which the artist is unknown, although some have tried to associate him with a specific artist. The paternity of this work still remains a mystery, as well as what the painting itself represents. Depicted in an oval shape in the foreground is the Madonna, praying in front of the child, held up by a very young Saint Giovannino. What catches the attention of ufologists around the world is not in the foreground, but in the background. In the sky above the natural landscape of a country river, a disc-shaped flying object is depicted, which gives off its own light. The shape, position, and way of flying of this object has been a source of study for many years, to try to understand this strange object in a religious context. Under the flying object, a farmer is observing it, witness of an extraterrestrial event. He covers his eyes from the glare, and his dog next to him also seems to see the flying object. But the mysteries of this painting do not stop at the flying object on the right. If you look at the sky on the opposite side, to the left, you can see the shape described by the historical precedents that reported it. The torch surrounded by 3 of the 6 presumed fiery stars that surround it. The same images under the same circumstances. It is certainly not easy to reconstruct the history of UFO sightings in Italy in the past. But certainly the testimonies and documents that have been handed down to us speak very clearly to those who observe and analyze these things on a daily basis. It seems quite clear that ancient civilizations have had contacts with flying entities that come down from the sky, without, however, being able to grasp their true essence, and instead giving them, rightly so, a more religious and symbolic meaning. The apparitions in the country of the Renaissance, however, are not limited only to civilizations or cultures that are now part of the past. Observing and collecting this historical information, many realize that in reality these events are nothing more than the beginning of a long series of apparitions in the sky that will move an entire country in an era in which mass sharing is becoming increasingly important. Before the 20th century. Before moving on to the great mysteries of the 1900s, it is right that we stop in 2 completely different eras, both in terms of culture and progress. It is 1676 in Florence. L'Evangelisti and Mattini typography prints and sells a small book with a strange story. The title of the book was Succinct Report of an Unusual Light, which appeared throughout Tuscany and in many other places in Italy on the evening of the 31st of March 1676. In this story, written by an umbrella maker with a passion for astrology, reference is made to the event that took place on the evening of March the 31st, 1676, in which a very luminous disc-shaped body appears in the sky and which, in a very short time, passes from the Adriatic to the Tyrrhenian Sea. A real, very fast and shiny flying saucer that manifests itself in a poor Tuscany in a remote era. The other date we come across on our journey to the 20th century is 1864. We move in time, but not in space. In fact, we stay in Tuscany, in Montespertoli, near Florence, to be exact. It is the evening of November the 1st of that same year, when an Anglo-Italian countess, with a passion for astronomy, observes the sky, like she does most evenings. Without warning, she sees a huge ball of fire, larger than the size of a full moon, fly overhead, followed by a smaller orange ball floating in the air. After a few moments, the two globes disappear into thin air, without leaving any trace. But the sighting made by the Countess is recorded in the astronomical register, which can still be consulted today. Last but not least, a fundamental date for the history of the Italian state is 1871. In March of that year, all the states that made up the Boot were unified in the glorious Kingdom of Italy. In November of the same year, while the new parliament was inaugurated in the capital, Rome, most of the citizens were attracted by what would later be called the Star of Italy, a luminous body facing south. A luminous star, as big as a silver shield. Even the Italians of that era, like the Romans and the ancient Greeks before them, gave a symbolic meaning to that apparition, taking it as a good omen for the new politics and for a prosperous and peaceful government. For some cultures, prior to the very ancient ones, messages from heaven still had a profound meaning that impacted everyday life and destiny. The RS-33 Cabinet. For many years, it was always thought that the Roswell case, which took place in America in 1947, was one of the first, if not the first case, of an incident that saw the landing of an unidentified object on Earth. But there are stories and documents which would prove that one of the very first cases of a UFO crash on Earth took place in Italy, under the fascist dictatorship. It is June the 13th, 1933. A few months after Hitler's rise to power in Germany. Italy is already experiencing its 11th year of fascist dictatorship led by the Duce, Benito Mussolini. The Duce's policy is very rigid and oppressive. Political enemies are silenced, and control over the media and news is total. Verciate is a small town in northern Italy, in Lombardy. The day goes by like many others, and citizens carry out their daily chores like any other working day. Suddenly, the clear sky is crossed by a large trail of light. At first, it looks like a simple daytime shooting star, also very beautiful and peculiar. But then the celestial body begins to increase in size as it approaches the Earth. In an instant, the star picks up speed and crashes to the ground in 1,000 pieces. The fascist police are immediately alerted and head to the scene in no time. It is a period of great turmoil, and the state is constantly on alert. It is not the first nor the last time that action has been taken for a suspicious aircraft that lands on Italian soil. Furthermore, armed forces in times of war are trained to recognize at a glance all the models and various types of warfare equipment of both allies and enemies. In fact, the police immediately think they will find a British or American military plane at the site of the crash. But what they find instead is a strange scenario, to say the least. All around the point of impact, there are the remains of a strangely shaped aircraft that not even afterwards can be reconstructed. It is something they cannot identify, either among their own or among their enemies' means of transport. But the most disconcerting thing are the bodies of two pilots who are found not far from the crash. They are two strange figures with a human build, but which, perhaps also due to the crash, do not have the typical features of terrestrials. They would appear to be two very tall individuals. Their skin, their hair, and their eyes of a strange color. The government immediately bans the disclosure and diffusion of news regarding the incident, and the case is immediately entrusted to a cabinet set up for the occasion. The RS-33 Cabinet. The name of the cabinet is an acronym. R stands for ricerche, research. S means speciali, special. And the number 33 signifies that it was established in 1933. So RS-33 stands for the Cabinet for Special Research of the year 1933. It seems that this special ministry was led by one of the major political personalities of the time, the inventor of the radio telegraph, the ancestor of the telephone, Guglielmo Marconi. The cabinet arranges for the remains of the aircraft to be sent to a hangar of the Savoia Marchetti aeronautical establishments located in Vergiate, to be held there secretly. While the two bodies are preserved in formalin, Il Duce Benito Mussolini will later release highly confidential documents to ensure that everything is silenced. From the telegraph office in Milan, this telegram is sent. By personal order of the Duce, order the immediate, I repeat, immediate arrest for the possible diffusion of the news relating to the aircraft of unknown nature and origin, of which, from Stefani's press release, dated today at 7:30, stop. Arrange for the immediate withdrawal of any newspaper lead prints bearing the aforementioned news, stop. Set maximum penalties for violators up to and including prosecution by the State Security Court, stop. Give immediate acknowledgement of receipt of this telegram, stop. Signed, Special Affairs Executive, stop. Another document reads, Senate of the Kingdom, confidential personal note. 1. Notify the prefect. 2. Arrange immediate recovery of the aircraft. 3. Order the immediate arrest of all witnesses. Appoint Special Section RS-33 of the OVRA, present in each provincial capital or its subsection. 4. Address each report with the qualification of maximum secrecy and precedence over all priorities to the Central Meteorological Office at the Sapienza University of Rome. Exclusive relevance, Cabinet RS-33. 5. Officially prevent the dissemination of any news, especially in the press. 6. For the purpose of the previous point, it is necessary to publish from time to time very short articles in which the phenomenon is reported. And a final document. Senate of the Kingdom. Dear De Santi, I am sending you, as requested and verbally agreed, the note for your rule. Do not make copies. Do not even mention it to your deputy. For any matter having to do with the RS-33 cabinet, come to me first. I typed these lines myself so as not to expose them to the eyes of my secretaries. So, act accordingly. From these documents, which seem to come directly from the Senate of the Kingdom of Italy, the intent to completely cover up the story is more than clear, trying to silence any possible transmission of the events that took place. Furthermore, note number 6 of the second document reads the phrase, "It is necessary to publish from time to time very short articles in which the phenomenon is reported." This last order undoubtedly demonstrates an attempt to manipulate the news to avoid making that cover-up too shameless and concocted. Furthermore, it is now known of the interest that dictatorships, such as the Nazis, had in these types of aerospace vehicles, and of how, for the entire duration of their regimes, they attempted to recreate these alien technologies to use them for their own war purposes. It would seem that the Mussolini dictatorship managed to keep this incredible event hidden for a long time. At the end of the war, a month before the liberation of Italy, the Americans managed to gain a foothold in the occupied country and obtain many strategic points to be able to carry out their war missions. March 1945. A two-engine Boston aircraft belonging to the 55th Fighter Bomber Squadron of the RAF is on a mission over the Alps. It's night time, and it's returning to its temporary base in Forlì. The pilot observes 6 huge incandescent metal balls in the sky that give off an intense red light the size of 3 terrestrial moons. These spheres fly with a strange alignment, and the plane, to get past them, is forced to operate various evasive maneuvers to avoid crashing. This risk increases while trying to escape these menacing spheres. Suddenly, the onboard equipment that controls the military aircraft seems to have problems. Mysterious interference prevents the pilot from optimally controlling the plane. And, having now reached the south coast of Trieste, he is forced to take one last reckless action to save himself. He flies down into a dive until he almost touches the water, where the spheres can't reach him. Once altitude is regained, the mysterious pursuers are gone. and the pilot can return safely to base, completing his mission. This is one of many cases reported during World War II that reference what were later referred to as Foo Fighters. It is a term coined by the Royal Air Force and the US Army Air Force, the two major British and American armed air forces, which during the Second World War had several cases of sightings of these unidentified aircraft. These Foo Fighters were generally flying objects that did not belong to any faction and were seen flying in the sky during military operations. Initially, they thought they could be enemy aircraft, created specifically not to be recognized. But when the descriptions were studied better, it was understood that they couldn't be human aircraft. Fireballs, halos of light, bright objects hidden behind the clouds. This mystery still remains unsolved. November the 28th, 1942. The Royal Air Force crew of the 61st Bombardment Squadron is flying in the Italian skies to carry out a bombing mission over Turin. Approximately at the height of Pinerolo, 10 to 15 miles from Turin, their main target, the soldiers on board the aircraft see a flying object, about 60 to 90 meters wide, with 4 pairs of red lights, which is moving at a speed of about 800 kilometers per hour. The airmen are shocked. No fighter, neither enemy nor allied, can reach such speed in flight. All this happens in a few seconds, and then the UFO disappears. About 5 minutes pass, and in an undefined area of the Alps, the crew once again sees the same object, darting across the sky at the same speed. Had it reappeared to keep an eye on them? The crew reports to command, thinking that the enemies may have built a new type of invincible aircraft to win the war. Then history turns the tables. On April the 25th, 1945, Italy was freed from the oppression of the fascist dictatorship, and naturally, many armed forces of the Allied countries took possession of many secrets of the dictatorship. It is precisely the US Air Force that, at the end of the war, manages to get its hands on all the secret documents of the fascists, and it sends them to America, where they are archived. The military area designated for the storage of these documents and related evidence is the current base at Groom Lake, Nevada, which was used as an artillery and bombing test area during World War II, that will one day be renamed Area 51. These secrets remained in the dark until they were recatalogued and absolved from the wording top secret. So, in the 90s, a package containing precisely these documents that refer to the RS-33 cabinet arrived in anonymous form at the Italian National Ufological Center. Here the documents were studied and put back together, and the mystery was brought to light. However, there is another anomalous case, not attributable to the dictatorship, but which took place in the midst of the fascist regime. April 1937. In a small town near Naples, it is just after 2 in the morning, and 2 tax agents are doing a regular patrol on their bicycles when they suddenly hear some shouting. One of the officers gets off his bike and shines his flashlight at the spot where he heard the shouts. Against all expectations, the man illuminates a strange and gigantic object with dimensions of about 25 meters in diameter and about 6 meters in height. Its shape is that of 2 plates turned upside down and joined together. The lower part is slightly flattened, and both above and below there are small semidomes. On the body of the aircraft, there are 3 portholes in a row, and inside them, the 2 agents are able to distinguish a slight fluorescence. The UFO releases its own silver light and rises from the ground at great speed, to then fly towards Vesuvius, leaving behind it a luminous silver trail. The vision lasts about 30 seconds, but that's enough to traumatize the 2 agents. It is not clear whether or not they told this story after the fall of fascism, and it remains a mystery how this case managed to escape the control and censorship of the RS-33 cabinet. But it certainly isn't something that can escape a deeper analysis for future ufological research. The 1950s. The war is over, and with it, the dictatorship which led to death, poverty, and hunger among the people. Now, a new great period of economic, social, and cultural prosperity has begun in Italy. The 1950s are called the boom years, where a large part of the population regains its social status and manages to recover from the dark and dangerous times. Cinema and TV go crazy with programs of all kinds. Science fiction takes over in every element of the media, and the images of an unknown space inhabited by alien beings spread further and further. We are in Varese, a small city in Lombardy. The day of April the 24th, 1950, was struck by an enormous and violent storm. A worker in his 40s leaves his house in the evening to get some air when he notices something unusual that attracts his attention. A strange green shimmer appears to come and go right in front of his house. The man immediately thinks of a fault in the power line, and, as if magnetically intrigued, decides to go and investigate. However, instead of being faced with a scenario that could be familiar to him, the poor man finds himself in the midst of an unusual scene. There is in fact a huge hemispherical structure with its upper part that seems to be cut away. This structure, about 10 meters high, has a strange checkered covering. In addition to being placed on the ground, the object has a ladder supported by 2 rods, which leads to a rectangular opening illuminated by a light, with the open door of a hatch. Inside the opening, the man sees an intricate organism of intertwined pipes, other ladders, cylinders, and valves connected to pressure gauges. Unfortunately for the man, the vision does not end here, because near the external ladder, there are two humanoid figures, about 1.70 meters tall, covered in huge diving suits, like those for marine diving, complete with breathing masks, from which, at the height of the mouth, extends a tube with an opening at the end. These beings move around the structure very slowly, which makes the man think that what they are wearing are very heavy and uncomfortable suits. Above the two beings, there is a metal platform, supported by an arm like a crane, and on it, a third being equipped with the same suit is intent on working on something outside the structure. As far as the man can understand from what he sees, this third being has a pistol-shaped instrument in his hand, which, in contact with the outside of the structure, produces a strange intermittent green light. He is welding or repairing something on the external part of that strange hemisphere. The light from that tool reveals the original color of that enormous luminescent structure. In fact, it seems that it is made of a common metal. The human mind, in dangerous situations, has surprising defense mechanisms. In fact, the worker, seized by a surge of humanity, perhaps to try to make sense of that absurd situation in his head, tries to make contact with these beings and greets them. He tells them that his house is nearby and asks if they need a hand, if he can help them with anything. The answer he gets, however, is nothing the man can imagine. Perhaps expecting a kind response, he instead hears strange and incomprehensible sounds coming from the beings' masks. At this point, the idea is formed in the confused man's mind that they cannot be beings from his own planet, nor that the vehicle can be any of those known to him. And it is here that fear assails him. Panic and the desire to escape make him react instinctively. The man turns and starts to run away. But before he can completely escape from that situation, he turns one last time to these aliens and manages to see that one of them has picked up a strange instrument that he recognizes as a camera. The being points it towards the poor worker on the run and shoots out a beam of light aimed right at him. The escaping man feels pushed to the ground, as if by an invisible and incredibly powerful force. He falls to the ground and ends up on the edge of a large stone, injuring himself. Helpless and with no way out, the man struggles to get up. But before he is able to, all the lights and luminescence around him go out. What he remembers next is seeing the hemispherical structure rise to the sky and disappear in the dark of night at an unprecedented speed. The next day, Gathering his courage, and curious as to what happened to him the night before, the man returns to the location of the sighting. He is shocked and confused, but he knows that if he doesn't investigate what happened, he will always be left with doubts. Reaching the location, he finds unequivocal traces, 4 indentations in the ground, about a meter in diameter, some burnt grass around the site, and a few pieces of a gritty, shiny metal. He collects these fragments of metal, thinking that they may be residues left by the welding operation that the third being was performing on the structure. Finally, the man decides to report the incident to the Varese police force, who, however, to his great surprise, warn him not to tell anyone anything about the incident, to avoid creating alarmism in the city. Small towns and cities are places where rumors spread quickly, and a sighting of a UFO, complete with the presence of 3 hostile aliens, could cause panic in the city. The man is left alone with his secret. Unfortunately, his fall also caused him some physical problems, but these didn't impede his desire to discover the truth. In fact, he takes the pieces of metal that he collected from the vehicle landing site to be analyzed, and discovers that it is an anti-friction metal, or a type of metal that is much more resistant to corrosion and harder than most common metals. It would seem to be a metal that is also found on planet Earth, but the fact that the third being was trying to weld or drill it makes the whole situation even more curious. So the device that he was using and that gave off those green sparks must have been some sort of very advanced tool to be able to treat such a hard metal. The man decides to keep his promise to the police not to say anything about it. But, as already mentioned, rumors spread quickly in a small village, and the poor worker becomes the target of ridicule by his fellow citizens. Then, after 2 years, he decides to tell the whole story to the newspapers, who accept the news and report it with great satisfaction, despite the fact that the remains of the evidence, such as the metal that he had collected, have been lost. Who knows how? The 1950s are but the beginning of a large mass dissemination of extraterrestrial events. Thanks to the sharing of media information and news that circulate much faster than in the past. In 1954, in Europe and especially in Italy, in autumn between September and November, there is a large and anomalous wave of sightings that occur in the south and west of the European continent. There is talk of traces on the ground of unidentified aircraft and real encounters with humanoid creatures that seem to come from other planets. The most singular and most spectacular case of all, however, remains the great sighting of October the 27th, 1954, during a football match. At the Giovanni Berta Stadium in Florence, the first half of the friendly match between Fiorentina, who are playing at home, and Pistoiese, their rival team, has just ended. It's a hard-fought game. In fact, the score is a 2-2 draw. Spectators are ready to resume supporting their teams to see what the final result will be. It's about 3:30 p.m. and the kickoff is about to start the second half. But suddenly, the crowd's attention is drawn to something different than the match. The excitement is so high that even the players are distracted and are forced to look to the skies. 2 mysterious silver flying objects are chasing each other just above the stadium. Some describe them as cigar-shaped objects, others as huge crushed spheres, and even others as singular seagull wings fluttering in the sky. This sighting could have ended here. A lot of people see two silver flying objects chasing each other. A great classic of ufology. But something else also happens. Something that affects everyone and forces them to definitively stop the match. Mysterious silver filaments begin to rain down from the sky on the heads of the players and the unsuspecting spectators. This type of event is recognized by ufologists all over the world as silicious cotton wool, or angel hair, that is, a sticky substance that would fall simultaneously with UFO sightings. This angel hair falls from the sky, and upon first contact with the ground, or humans attempting to grab it, dissolves into thin air. The spectators and players are shocked. No one can explain this incredible event. It turns out, however, later, that this is not the only sighting of two flying objects that release this angel hair from the sky, but that throughout the day, in different areas of Florence, the same thing happens. For example, a few hours earlier, the same two aircraft appeared, and the same cotton wool rained down near the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore in Piazza Duomo in Florence. The rain of silver filaments falls and vanishes into thin air. Fortunately, a young student manages to collect a sample of these filaments and informs the newspapers of what had happened. The news was reported in the press the following day, and everyone was talking about the incredible silver rain that covered Florence for almost half an hour on an ordinary day. The student takes the collected sample to the analytical chemistry office in Florence to have it analysed, and the report that emerges from that analysis is as follows. Substance with a fibrous structure with considerable mechanical resistance to traction and torsion. When heated, it darkens, leaving a fusible and transparent residue. This fusible residue spectrographically shows to contain predominantly boron, silicon, calcium, and magnesium. In a purely hypothetical line, the substance examined on a microchemical scale could be a borosilicate glass. The various theories that have occurred over the years would try to explain the event as an army flight exercise, and that the fibrous substance could be a special substance used by the military to confuse enemy radars. But the two flying objects, how come a large part of the city population has not been able to identify their shape? Some spoke of cigars, others of discs, others even of seagull wings. How come no one in their statements refers to military aircraft? The mystery of that strange football match in Florence still remains unsolved. But it is a case that is still being discussed in UFO circles. Two authentic aliens. The world changes and evolves. We begin to leave the carefree and prosperous life of the 50s, even in Italy. There is a very singular fact that dates back precisely to the 1960s and does not concern ordinary people, but rather two very important personalities in the country, a pope and a president. In 1961, Pope John XXIII was walking with his secretary in the gardens of Castel Gandolfo, the Pope's summer residence, one of the most beautiful and evocative places in Rome. The two are practically alone. There is no one around them. Attracted by something happening in the sky, the Pope and the Cardinal look up and see various coloured lights swirling overhead. Everything takes place in total silence, until one of these lights detaches from the others and lands right in the Vatican gardens. The two men are amazed. What looked like a star now takes on another meaning. A sort of hatch opens from the central part of the luminous aircraft, and a figure steps out. Something that incredibly resembles a man, but which is difficult to distinguish due to the luminescence that surrounds it. Without even realizing it, the two clergymen kneel in front of this apparition and contemplate it for a few minutes, until the Pope himself gets up and slowly approaches the strange light. The Cardinal remains where he is to observe the Pope talking to that strange humanoid for what seemed like infinite minutes, without being able to hear anything of their conversation. Finally, when the two finish talking, the alien re-enters his spaceship and takes off again into the sky, disappearing from sight. The Pope approaches the Cardinal. Tears run down his face, and he says, "God's children are everywhere, even if sometimes we have difficulty recognizing our own brothers." This is the last time Pope John XXIII will speak of that event. In fact, the Holy Father asks the Cardinal to keep silent about what the two experienced. Only following the death of the then Pope, the secret was told by the Cardinal. All this caused a sensation in all the newspapers of Italy, 20 years later, when the news was reported. News that upsets some because of its amazing nature, but which confirms instead many theories of others. These facts managed to shed light on many news stories that were reported in the past, but which had been deliberately forgotten. In fact, it would seem that the same incredible encounter took place 11 years earlier. In October 1950, in the same gardens of the Vatican. Pope Pius XII saw 3 different times a silvery and luminous disk, which rotated on itself in the sky, and as it passed, it released beams of light of various colours all around. It is Tuesday, the 20th of August, 1963. The then President of the Italian Republic, one of the most important and authoritative figures of the new Republic, has just returned to the presidential estate in Castel Poziano. Outside, in front of the entrance gate, is the Berliner, the presidential car, with its driver who has not yet turned off the engine to park. All of a sudden, the president's car starts acting up. The electrical instruments on the dashboard start to malfunction, inadvertently making the entire vehicle go crazy. Suddenly, a strong hiss can be heard that breaks the calm of that summer day. In the sky appears a flying saucer, about 20 meters wide, which quickly shoots over the palace, leaving a tremendous smell of heated metal in the air, like an engine that has just melted down. The Air Force rushes to the scene of the event and interrogates the only true witness of this story, the president's personal driver. Failing to carry out more in-depth investigations, the Air Force passes the case to the Americans, considered more competent in the matter. Two reported cases. Among the most singular cases that have marked Italy, one has to do with a luminous circle and another with a flying diver. These are two cases that are transcribed in reports by military personnel and law enforcement agencies who recount these events that happened during exercises. It is around 5:48 p.m. and we are at the military airport located in Cagliari, Sardinia. 3 helicopters carrying members of the 21st Squadron Group, Ursa Maggiore, of the Light Aviation Division, are flying around in a training session. For a few seconds, they see a glowing orange circle flying very close to their aircraft. As if that weren't enough, around 6:35 p.m, even from the control tower, they managed to see that same UFO near the 3 helicopters. The 3 helicopters tried to overtake it, but this orange circle begins to rise more and more, acquiring unprecedented speed, and then flies away towards the horizon. There are many testimonies of citizens and soldiers who seem to have seen the same flying object in the sky. The strange thing is that about 2 months after the event, the Ministry of Defense releases an official communication in which it declares that the aforementioned aircraft was nothing more than a normal military aircraft in flight, launched for an exercise. The problem, however, is that no one was aware of this exercise, not even the military airport control tower, which, when the incident happens, absolutely confirms the description and vision of the pilots on board the 3 helicopters. It is June the 15th, 1993, and a commander of the fire brigade is giving a flying lesson on an AB-412 helicopter in the presence of 4 other cadet pilots. The helicopter is flying about 600 meters from the ground, when, suddenly, the crew sees an unidentified flying object approaching them. Only thanks to the quick reflexes of the skillful instructor, the accident is avoided by a hair's breadth, and the helicopter manages to dodge that strange object. Seeing it pass by from behind the helicopter, the crew describe a curious 5-foot-tall diving suit with a globe forming a head, 2 huge yellow eyes, and what seem like limbs in a single block of ochre colour, from the back of which a large trapezoidal antenna protrudes. The strange diving suit flies up to a high altitude against the wind, and after a few seconds it quickly moves away, the instructor commander warns the control tower of the presence of this strange flying diver, but ground radars fail to detect any objects in flight in the vicinity of their helicopter. These and other reports present very precise descriptions of these unidentified flying objects, but most of the time they are archived by the military authorities themselves as cases of no interest, or simply as misunderstandings and/or blunders made by witnesses. One among the last. One of the last most significant sightings dates back to 2008 and involves another pilot, this time of a glider on the slopes of Mont Blanc. In fact, it is there that this pilot sees a white object approaching from below, towards his position. He makes a small turn, and the UFO is now next to his glider. The man can observe that it has a spherical shape with two vertical cylinders in its lower part and is more or less 2.5 meters wide. Once on the ground, the glider pilot calls the aviation center and asks for confirmation of the presence of other aircraft in the area. The Air Force reports that no one has flown in that area apart from him. Fortunately, the pilot has a GPS with which he managed to record the movements of that UFO. And this is how it was possible to reconstruct the whole event, which, however, is still shrouded in mystery. Italy is littered with unexplained, bizarre, and still mysterious UFO events throughout its whole history, from the ancient Romans to modern day. If ufological studies did not spend time to analyze all these cases in order to grasp their logical connection, the entire history of a country would be lost, which, unlike many others, has had and still has many alien contacts, as well as contacts with forms of unidentified life. Fireballs, spears, and round silvery objects that give off multicolored trails, large shields or overturned plates whizzing across the sky, silver filaments that rain down following the sighting of a flying object. As we can observe, all these incidents have repeated over time, from very ancient times to more recent days, without being able to explain, or very often, even accept them. But despite attempts to cover up or hide the most obvious things, the truth about these stories, more often than not, comes out on its own. If you look for the right information, even regarding modern times, you will discover that, in reality, there are still sightings in Italy, and many more than you can imagine. Absurd things that most often resonate like those rhymes that are repeated by history. How much do we know about our past? Do we have the ability to follow the traces of our history accepting the direction in which they lead us. Continuing to ask these questions in the research we do on information about these cases can bring us closer to discovering the truth and being able to reevaluate even the entire history of a country and a culture even far from our own. Like space travelers exploring its vastness, we all take that same path into the unknown.